All right, hello everyone. We're getting ready for your exam, your midterm exam. So congratulations. I hope you're enjoying the course so much. Let's just jump right into it here. This video is just a helping hand to help you begin your questions and then also organize your answers because you're delivering these through writing. Keep in mind, I'm a writing teacher. Usually that's most of my teaching load. And so I'm always interested in helping folks write as well as they can. So with that, let's take a look at this document. This document is uploaded on D2L. It's here on the screen as well. And you will have, eventually you will open your questions and you'll have your actual midterm exam. So we'll talk about this. So there's two things that probably are going to be on your mind when you're starting the exam. First, what do I need to do? And the midterm always works like this. These may not be the questions that you have on your midterm, but they're always going to look basically the same. The short answer section for the midterm is going to be answer two of the three following, and you can see you've got options 1, 2, and 3. And then you've got a long answer down below. We'll talk about those briefly. So regardless of when you're taking this course, whatever summer you might be taking it, that will always be the same. And we'll go back and revisit those in a minute. And then how to write a good essay answer, whether it's the short answer or the long answer. Let's take a look at that. So as I said, two things probably on your mind: the thinking and developing of the answer, and then actually the delivery, organizing it, right? We already talked earlier in the course about the importance of meal paragraphing strategies. You might have your own way of writing paragraphs that works for you. That's fantastic. I just offer the meal paragraph strategy, which remember is main idea, evidence, analysis, link back to thesis or a bigger idea. That's just an easy thing to think of, and you can vary it how you want to, as many sentences on any of these as you wish. So here's what you want to do to write a good essay answer. So first, you need to turn the basic question into a thesis, right? So I know you know this stuff, but we're just going to make sure that we don't lose anybody. So here's one. For a fall and recovery narrative, argue that Big Two-Hearted River does or does not show at least 3 criteria from Merchant's fall and recovery narrative, right? So what does this mean in terms of your thinking? Well, there's a lot of ideas that go with fall or recovery or shared between the two. So you just need to come up with 3 of them, and you're saying these are the 3 that I can use to evaluate, in this case, Big Two-Hearted River, right? And that's all you would need to do. There are probably, if we really wanted to count them all up, 8, 10, 12 different criteria, different things that usually we expect to see or that exist inside of a fall narrative or the fall plus recovery together. You can't include that many in a short answer or maybe even a long answer. That sounds more like a 20-page paper to me, right? But what we can do is we can pick out 3 good ones that seem to pertain to prove that either Big Two-Hearted River can be read as fall or fall and recovery, or maybe we shouldn't read it that way. And that's up to you. I want you making these choices. There's no right answer. All we have are interpretations, right? And that's the way the world works. The world is oftentimes big and open-ended, and different people have different viewpoints. And our job as a good thinker in college and after college is to make sure that we show up and have as many different ways of evaluating things as possible. And that's what this course is all about. So you'll pick out 3 that you find pertinent. Maybe you like them the most, you feel the most comfortable with them, or the best case scenario would be there's 3 criteria that you feel really, from the fall, that you feel really match Big Two-Hearted River and can help us explain what it is, if it is a fall or not. So pick those 3 that you feel are the best ones to match up with your interpretation of Big Two-Hearted River. So where do we go from there then, if that's what we're doing? And of course, you could do that with any of these questions. You'll notice I even break it down by criteria. I keep mentioning the same word. So anytime you have a definition, you can break it up into criteria. So you can imagine what the fall would be. You can go into Merchant and find those things. Or an easy one, maybe since we're here, pastoralism. Remember the Sheaf's reading had that nice list you've bumped into over and over again in the course. Here's what the pastoral typically is. And it's a list of about 8 things, right? Wilderness, the unconsciousness of nature, anti-modernism, right? And so you just need to pick, for this short answer here, I believe it asks for at least 2. I say right here, you want at least 2 criteria, maybe 3, on what pastoral is. You go back in and you pick out, you're looking at, I won't read the whole question now, I'll let you read it, but you're picking out a poem and saying, is it pastoral or not? Well, you'd pick out 2 from that list of 10, or as I say here, maybe you could even have 3. And that'll be enough to make your short answer go. And you show that, let's say it's a poem. Let's say you choose God's Grandeur by Hopkins. Does God's Grandeur have at least 2 important criteria from the pastoral, the definition of the pastoral, that would make it seem like, yeah, we can call this a pastoral poem? Or if you want to argue that it's not because it's missing some important elements, then you could still use Shees's definition of the pastoral and say, God's Grandeur, actually, no, not so much. It's not pastoral because it's missing these 2 things we usually see in the pastoral, and we do not see them. And you would explain that they are not in that poem. And there you go. You've got a good answer, right? So that's what you want to do. You want to break these definitions. We tend to think of definitions, big unified concepts, and you want to break them down into smaller components. And that's true not just in this course, but that's typically how our thinking works. That's how we come up with interpretations. It really doesn't matter what field you're in, what your major is. That's what you're doing, is breaking big concepts up into littler concepts that you can then use to analyze things. And so this course is no different, and your answers will go better if you organize around those principles. So let's take it from there. Let's pick it up back to how to write a good essay. Now we've kind of got a way of approaching analysis and sort of evaluation or critique of these poems. We can talk about the organization. So again, we mentioned this earlier. Turn the question into a basic thesis. Add in your chosen concepts to the thesis. That would be your, we could even say, criteria right here. What are the 3 things, the 3 parts of the fall that you're going to talk about? What are the 3 parts of pastoralism that you'll use to evaluate poems? Get them up into your thesis too. And we'll have an example at the end of this document that you can see that happening. So use the above as a basic opening. You might have a brief closing as well, and we can take a look at my example I've written up for you on a poem we didn't read in class. And then your body paragraphs. We all know body paragraphs are where you do the bulk of the work. That's where all the explanation and analysis comes from, right? Where you get into the details. So I would recommend just a nice meal paragraphing strategy to keep you on track and let you say whatever you want in a fairly organized way. If you're unfamiliar with this, go back and watch the videos that were posted at the beginning of the course, or if you need a review. All right, so here's what we want to do. Break each interpretive concept into several criteria. I kind of already went over this just a minute ago, but you get it in writing here too. So again, the example. So if we're talking about the fall, break it into 2 or 3 things that the fall usually has. We could break into 2 or 3 things pertaining to gender, if you remember the Merchant reading, about Eve being cast out, and she's seen as the one that tempted Adam. So it's sort of her fault. It's the fall into original sin. It's also the fall into a non-perfect environment. The environment becomes flawed, and humans become flawed. We could see those 2 as maybe 2 different criteria, so that not only do we see environmental degradation, or humans always see the environment as degraded, but they see themselves and their life as degraded as well. And that might be 2. Maybe that's enough then. You could take that into whatever you want to interpret. So you can see there's a lot of other ideas that come out of that reading that you could also use for your criteria. But that's what I want you to do here. So there's too many to use. Just pick a couple good ones. Each criterion then can become your main idea for a body paragraph. So if we want to return to what I just said, we're saying that, because of the fall, we see the environment as degraded. Let that be the M in your meal paragraph. Let that be your topic sentence. And you just talk about environmental degradation, or how we tend to see the environment as degraded because we have the fall narrative that makes us see the environment as degraded. Would make sense then your next paragraph to go in and look at maybe humans as potentially degraded, if that's what you're looking at, right? Et cetera, et cetera. So you just want to do that a few times. Do 1 criteria per paragraph, I think, is an easy way for this class at least to do things. And you can probably do this in other classes too, or future writing. That would be good. And ta-da, you've got a nice answer, a fairly predictable way of giving a pretty good answer. As long as you've got good support, good quotes, or good summaries of events in the readings that become your evidence, and you can then explain those, right? So let's take a look at a good one here. Here's one that I wrote up. I labeled everything as like intro, thesis, first body paragraph. You don't have to do that. You can just write the paragraph. But we do have a good topic sentence, so to speak. So this is on Robert Frost's Design, a poem I really wanted to include in the course but didn't have time for. So you might just want to pause the video here for a minute, and I'll let you take a look at it, give it a quick read. a poem that clearly I think lends itself to an ecological reading and is commenting on interdependence and food webs and all this type of stuff. So go ahead and take a look at it, pause the video briefly and read through it. And we're back. And so here's what we might say about this. Now what I need to do is I need to find 3 criteria for ecological readings and ecological interdependence, because that's what I'm going to argue for. This poem actually comments on interdependence of things. And so I looked through the poem and I said, okay, here are some things in the poem that seem to match of the many criteria of ecological interdependence, right? And so I came up with the adaptations, in this case in color, right? Everything is white in this poem. The spider, the moth, the flower, all white. So that would be ecology. That would be adaptation, evolution, right? The food web competition. Remember, that's something we learned from the Capra reading. These are all from the Capra readings, potentially, or just your own working knowledge. And so that's in there. And long-term pattern and form. Remember, Capra talked about that too. When ecologists map things and they keep seeing the same things over and over, we call that patterns and form. And so I saw that in the poem as well. And so I made sure that those things made their way into a very, very basic opening. Notice it's pretty short, but it basically mentions the poem, mentions the basic scenario that I'll be looking at. And you would want to do this as well in your own answer. And then the 3 things that are going to make it go. I know this is a bit like a 5-paragraph essay from high school. It just turns out to be that way. They won't all be that way necessarily. So first body paragraph, you can see what I'm doing. They're all meal paragraphs, so to speak. I've got my main idea first, the ecological adaptation. I'd give a brief definition so we know what territory we're in, that species changes better adapt them to their environment. And then here I actually focus on what that's going to look like in the poem. And that is a predator's color adaptation. And so we see that then, of course, it's my job to prove that the spider is white, the flower is white, and I'm setting that up. And I've got the lines from the poem, right? I've got a little typo right here. I guess I'll fix that as long as we're here. And that the moth is white as well. So basically I can just say, great, they've all, and then there's my evidence, here's my analysis. Both the spider and the moth, of course, have evolved to be nearly invisible on this white flower, even though in this poem the spider wins and still is the successful predator, right? But so I talk about that, how everything is white to match the flower and how it might help them survive, right? And that's good. I've proven some ecological dependence by looking at commentary on evolution in the poem, right? Next, food web competition. I know these seem basically the same, but I can treat them as 2 slightly different criteria linked to ecology, right? So next, it's the food web competition. Remember, Capra taught us. I forgot to put in the page numbers. Apologies, you should put page numbers so I can track down what you're talking about in yours. I'll put mine in a minute. But food web competition is one of the most basic interdependent relationships. Things eat each other, right? And so I talk about that. You can read through this paragraph to see how I'm covering that they are eating each other, and this is part of the interdependence. I also put into this paragraph that in the poem, at the end of the 2nd stanza, all 3 of them are just sort of listed. And so there's no hierarchy, and it seems like all 3 of them are sort of unified. They're called ingredients in the poem. And we know that ingredients disappear to make one larger thing, a bread, cake, whatever it might be, right? So things lose their individuality to the greater whole. And that's exactly what the spider, the flower, and the moth are doing as well by being called ingredients, right? They're losing their individuality and becoming a bigger part of the biosystem, the unified thing, right? So I covered that in there. That's where I took that one. That's where you've got to take some liberty as a thinker and a writer and take the paragraphs where you want. And then I've got a 3rd paragraph here where I talk more about pattern and form. There it is. We talked about it in the intro, of course, right up there. And ta-da, it's a topic sentence here. And I'm running out of time in the video, so I'll let you kind of look through what I did with this one. But I basically said this is about long-term evolutionary patterns and time, and the poem is looking at time and how things develop and saying, yeah, this is a pattern, this is form, and things develop over tens to hundreds of thousands of or millions of years in order to have these patterns that are adaptive and help them survive. And then I just close it down right here by bringing those things up again. If there's anything else odd in the poem that you need to mention that works against you, you could mention that as well, in a body paragraph or maybe in your opening or your closing. In this poem, the speaker's a bit playful and says, maybe design, maybe there is no design. But then I just say, yeah, the poem can definitely be read as design because, and I bring it around to that and in the closing. So I hope this was useful. The documents are online, and good luck on the exam. I hope you do well.